Hello. In the Crown of Aragon, 639 years ago, it was April 24th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried, and I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico. And this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Multcara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. Let's begin today's document. So if you've been following along with recent episodes, I've been very fixated on trying to find indications of Joan's ill health or when he gets hit by the latest round of the illness that he's been, off and on struggling for months now. And so today's document took me on a total tangent that is, I think, just one of the most interesting things to come out of this entire project. And it has nothing to do with what I'm trying to figure out. Like, my most urgent research task right now is to figure out more information about when Joan falls ill. But this is just completely different, and it's something I just am so excited about. It takes us millennia into the past. Millennia! Alright, so it all centers on the history of a single word. Before we get to that, though, I know I'm just destroying you with suspense right now, but I did want to just give the background about what this document is. It's from Violante's Secret Seal Register 2053. It's one that I put through the OpenClaw pipeline. So I opened up the automatic text recognition document from OpenClaw as it had produced through its instructions to Gemini and Claude. And I saw that this document was one that was a pretty easy one. I pretty much understand every word in this document. It's in Catalan. It is addressed to a seneschal. The seneschal rank, I'm still pretty hazy on exactly what that means. It seems to me like it's just some kind of high official. It's not like the leader of a place. And I need to do more research on this, but the addressee at the bottom of the letter reads Al noble e amat nostra lo seneschal de Belcaire. Belcaire. So there's some kind of official, and I wasn't even sure where Belcaire was. It sounded pretty French. So fortunately, I got an modern spelling from the AI and then just put that into Google Maps, and I saw that it was in France, just south of Avignon, and not coincidentally, it is right on the big river that goes, the direction of the river goes the opposite, but it's the river that connects Avignon and much further north of Avignon to the Mediterranean Sea. That is the Rhone River, Rhone, with a fun circumflex over the O. Love our little diacritical flourishes. Now, the Seneschal of Belcaire is some kind of official in charge of a town on the western edge of the Rhone River, and the place that's mentioned inside the document, Tarasco, is actually Tarascon with an N at the end, although maybe in French you don't pronounce that N. So it would just be said how it's spelled in this letter from Violante. And the Tarasco side of the river is, because these two towns are like facing each other, is often in some other kind of territory, so some other rules. So this is a border. This river is a border. And what we see throughout history is that the east side of the river is under the rule of one political entity, and then the west side of the river is under the rule of another. And we were actually in a moment of transition in the 1380s, because lo and behold, in 1385, the control of Tarasco was passed over to a French noble. I think it had been under the domination of a Genoese family controlling it. And this French noble made some kind of deal in 1385 to put Tarasco under his authority. But it wasn't the actual French noble himself, because he was too young. It was the regent who was ruling for this French noble. And I'm kind of being vague about it because now I'm going to deliver the information about who it was. Louis II of Anjou, who is being represented by his mother, Marie de Blois. She's a widow. She is ruling over the Anjou properties in Louis's stead until he comes of age. Do you remember who Louis II of Anjou is in current negotiations to betroth? That would be Yolanda of Aragon, the daughter of Joan and Violante. So we have a super interesting connection here. I also want to go back to something that I mentioned briefly, which is that Marie de Blois is trying to get control of this city through deal making, get it from the Genoese. And Genoa and the Crown of Aragon are absolutely rivals. You do have certain power brokers who act between them, and the financier that I've mentioned a couple times, Lucino Scarampi, is exactly that person. But they are larger. Their relationship, the Crown of Aragon and Genoa, their relationship is rivalrous. So they are often fighting over different territories around the Mediterranean. It's almost like a zero sum. When Genoa is doing better, the Crown of Aragon is doing worse, and vice versa. There's all these different places around the Mediterranean that they're trying to wrest control from each other. And this is come up in the context of Sardinia, where Joan is worried about rebellions in Sardinia. Well, guess what? Genoa had been the previous ruler of Sardinia. The Genoese weren't that popular with the Sardinians themselves, but that's beside the point. It really just is to illustrate that the Crown of Aragon and Genoa have this extreme competition with each other. So we've got a lot of different threads here, and it's definitely clear to me that Violante would have known that as she is writing about Tarasco, she's talking about a place that is related to the matrimonial negotiations that are going on in Avignon. And guess what? The first line of this letter is referring to Avignon itself, because the letter starts per letra dels ambassadors del Signor Re Marit e Signor Nostra molt car. We have a Signor Nostra molt car, which is the companion It's funny. It's the counterpart. It's Violante's way of saying molt cara compagnona. So Joan says molt cara compagnona. Violante says Signor nostro molt car. So the ambassadors have written a letter. So Violante specifies which ambassadors in the second line, beginning the second line. Qui son en corte de Roma. Now, at the beginning of this year, I would have maybe thought, oh, well, this is obviously Rome, as in Italy. But no, I have discovered, since I started this project, that those who followed and were allied to the Avignon Pope, they would refer to the Avignon court as the court of Rome. So, it's really hard for us looking back because the Avignon papacy has been called the Pope, they've been called the anti-Pope and the anti-papacy, the court of the anti-papacy, the anti-papal court. We don't even really have it. We don't have good ways to refer to this. But for those who were around and supporting the Avignon papacy at this time, like Violante, the way they saw this was that the Roman legacy, the throne of St. Peter, right? It just belonged through and through to those who were in Avignon at this time. It had relocated to Avignon, but the institution was continuous. And so when Violante says Corte de Roma, she is saying the papal court in Avignon under the authority of what we would today call the anti-pope Benedict. Oh, what's the number? I forget the number. Okay. So, here we have a letter that is being sent to somebody in charge of the port city, Belcaire, which is just across the river from another port city, Tarasco. And Violante is going to tell this person something she heard from her ambassadors in Avignon. And now we get into what she's heard. She's heard that there is a ship, that there are merchants who have been stopped in Tarasco. But before she says Tarasco, she, in line 4, says that these merchants have some possessions, okay? And their possessions have been confiscated. The phrase she uses is cobrien alcunes robes. Robes. All right. That word immediately brought to my mind clothing. It is basically the same word as modern Catalan word for clothing, roba. If you have studied Castilian, you would easily associate that with ropa in Castilian for clothes. I think I first learned the Castilian word ropa in 7th grade. So I've had in my mind this association between that word and the English word for clothes or clothing. And I encountered the medieval Catalan robes way long ago, like a couple years ago. And I was working on a different document for a different project, and I translated that as clothing. All right. The word appears a second time in this document on line 8. And it's basically, just a reiteration of, you really need to arrange for the authorities in Tarasco to release these robes. And so violent is basically using this word to describe, okay, what's the stuff that these merchants, and we know it's merchants because we have mercaderes in line 3 at the end. Okay. All right. Robes. So when I looked at what the AI large language models had created from their transcription and translation into English for this document, I was rather surprised because when they got to the word robes in both cases in this document, they did not translate it as clothes. They translate it as goods or like merchandise. And so I really wondered about that because it seemed really obvious to me that this would be clothes. And so I went to the Diccionari Català Valencia Balear and I typed in roba. And goodness gracious, I was pretty shocked at what I found. Because the first usages from in the sort of antique usages were for merchandise and not clothing. And if you use like a modern Catalan dictionary, you'll see that roba means clothing. But in the usages that appear in documents from this time, it does not mean clothing. It means goods or merchandise more generally. And so I got curious about this. Why? Why is this word for clothing that it's in our modern time used for clothing? Why is it being used for goods more generally? So I went to Claude and I asked it to do an etymological history of the word robes or roba. And at one point in my in the chat with Claude, I pasted in the entirety of the entry from the Diccionari Català Valencia Balear. And what came up was really astonishing to me because it turns out that in the earliest introduction of the words that sound like, RPO or RPA, these words were used to mean plunder. And then I started to think, oh my gosh, I understand how this worked. The really important piece of this is that the spread of the Visigoths after the decline of the Western Roman Empire, the Visigoths, they spread everywhere. And so this explains why in English we have the term robbery, right? Like theft, R-O-B, to rob somebody is to steal. It's because it's from the same origin in the kind of Germanic lineage of this word. But it's not just the Germanic, because that Germanic can be traced even earlier into some like Hebrew, it goes way back into this Indo-European lineage of the history of language and language development, and so in Roman you've got rumpo, and these words in these earliest languages are, not earliest ever, but like the earliest written languages are to mean to break away or to rip away, and so the plunder, the sense of plunder, is that someone has come and ripped away something from you. So you might be thinking, oh, clothes can be ripped away from you. Well, that's like very dramatic, and I don't think that's actually how the development went. So if you had that idea, like, okay, maybe, but that's not what Claude said. So what Claude said is that the word for plunder was pretty consistent across the centuries, and then you get to this point actually right around the time that Joanne and Violante were around. So in the 1400s, a little bit after them, you start to see that roba is being used in medieval Catalan, late medieval Catalan, to mean clothing. So in the Diccionary Català Valencia Balear, you see the earliest usages of the word to mean clothing around like 1410 or 1400. And so the word is like being transferred from the word for plunder, or you could say the goods, into a word for clothing. And I think it's kind of like this slang usage that we actually could connect with in how we talk in our modern time. Because sometimes you'll say something like, oh, you got the goods. And in that sense, you're basically saying something like, yeah, I've got, there's a way where this kind of makes sense, and I'm having trouble articulating it, but basically the move from saying merchandise to then saying clothes is one that makes sense to me if you think about it from like a slang perspective. Like, I'm wearing the latest goods, like I'm wearing the latest merchandise. When you think about what people do with merchandise, a lot of it has to do with conspicuous consumption, with showing what you have purchased, and clothes are one of the primary ways that people show what they have purchased. It's really hard to carry around like a big bag of your, stuff like that you've bought at the store all the time, but you're always carrying around your clothes on your body. And so it's easy to me to see how a generic word for merchandise took on a slang usage or a colloquial usage to mean clothes. And that's what happened. So when we see robes in the document today, it does not mean clothes. It means merchandise. But then I went back to a previous document from the podcast because I remembered, wait a second, I have seen a document that is definitely about cloth and textiles. It was the one from February 7th, in which Joanne is instructing his purchaser to get a big old treasure chest of stuff. It's the one where he's talking about the scepters, and he has all these like specific ones with sapphires. But on the first half of that letter, in, let's see, what is the folio number? So that one, I'll link to it in the show notes for today. It's register 1751, folio 15V has the first half of that letter. He says that he wants a bunch of this category of stuff, and he's about to list it more specifically. And the category of stuff is robes et joyes. Okay, second word means jewels, and that makes sense for all the scepters and stuff. But the first word, robes, I would, now that I've learned what I've learned, want to translate that as merchandise. But what's interesting is that in this letter, he has two categories of merchandise. The second category is clearly jewels, because he's talking about the scepters with the sapphires and so on. And that is the joyes. But before he gets to that, the first category of what he wants is all these precious textiles. And he uses the word drap a whole lot, D-R-A-P, like the English word draper. So drap is a word you see associated with tailoring and textile manufacturing and merchandise, sort of textile merchants can be referred to as drapers. So drap clearly means textiles, and in this situation, it's almost like Joanne is using the word robes in the sense of textiles only, but maybe not. It's just not clear. So because we're in this moment of transition where robes becomes a word for clothes, it could be that this is a very early attestation of that usage in Joanne's letter, but it might not be. Because here we have a letter from Violante from April 24th in which it is clearly not about clothes. There's no reason she would specify textiles in this letter. It so clearly means just merchandise generally. So this is just a really fun linguistic journey that I hope that you enjoyed, because I really loved seeing and just getting informed about the way that the word has transformed, and it takes you all the way back to like Hebrew from like millennia ago. It's just like this really interesting moment. I don't know. I think it's so interesting. I hope you do too. One last thing to talk about in this letter. It's actually coming back to something that I should have said when I was talking about the historical context of Belcaire and Tarasco. Remember how I was talking about Genoa and how Marie de Blois had arranged in 1385 for the transfer of the rule of Tarasco from a Genoese family, or like some kind of Genoese provincial authority, to the Duke of Anjou? Well, the person whose name appears in line 5, Nicola de Spindola, and then Violante says capita del dit lux, the captain, the person who's in charge of this location, this place, Nicola de Spindola. That is a very Genoese name. Did a little bit of scratching the surface research on this, just plugged it into the large language model, and it turns out that this person, Nicola, doesn't really appear in the historical record, but someone else with that last name, Balthazar de Spindola, was identified as somebody in charge of this region and this town representing Genoa. So I am almost 100% sure that Nicola de Spindola is Genoese, that the Genoese authorities still have some clout, and that maybe they're even in charge of a lot of operations in the port of Tarasco. And so whatever kind of transfer of authority that happened in 1385 to the Duke of Anjou, it does not mean that all the Genoese left. I think a lot of the bureaucrats and officials who were there from many decades of Genoese rule, they're still there. And I think this particular Genoese official, Nicola de Spindola, saw that there was an opportunity to mess around with a merchant ship from the Crown of Aragon and set off the chain of events that then Violante is trying to get some intervention on with this document. So much going on, and nothing to do with Joanne's illness, maybe. Okay. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook. Season 1, Molt cara companiona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I've done my job. Remember, the motto of the Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes, and listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. In the meantime, take care.